Hello. Oh, we need to push it to make it silent. Push it. Okay, so this works. Whoever wants this. Whoever wants
Yeah,
this.
you pass it on, right?
Okay, shall we start?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm ready. Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining our session tonight on data journalism globally, where it is heading. So here today I am
lovely
with
button in the middle.
this
Now on that one, the push button. Yeah.
Hello. Yeah. Okay. So I have two microphones. So today here we are with Mirko Lawrence, who is the innovation manager at Deutsche Welle and also CEO and founder of Data Wrapper. Mark Abra, head of the research and data at ICIJ, and Marianne Bouchard, manager of Data Journalism Awards for GEN. My name is Bahara Herabi, and I'm from the School of Information and Communication Studies at University College Dublin. So these are us. So today we are going to talk a little bit about data journalism briefly and what it is. If you're kind of new to data journalism and want to learn a little bit from Mirko on data journalism, then we will be presenting the initial results of the 2017 Global Data Journalism Survey. And if you haven't participated in it, there's still time, so don't worry about that. We will then kind of start a panel discussion that Mirko will be moderating on the state of data journalism and where it is heading, where Marianne and Mar will kind of help us have a very nice and interactive session. We will also be talking about Perugia Pledge, which is kind of a crowdsourced initiative that we have started asking journalists to kind of tell us how data journalism should be and kind of some, not rules exactly, but some opinions on how we should go forward, that Mirko will moderate that. And we are hoping to get a little bit of an interactive session with you guys for that. So I will just be passing it on to Mirko, and we will be talking about data journalism.
Yeah, I get up for that. I need to move.
Me too. This doesn't go off.
So this might be redundant for some of you, and you have heard it or whatever, but our experience is that with the many facets of how we can use and deploy data in the newsroom, there needs to be a common understanding, a push for how we can get started. Because we have too many journalists who are like watching it, knowing it. I do a lot of trainings, and very often they come in and say, yeah, I heard about it, but never did it. And then I have the second observation is once they never did it, second day they want to do a big interactive project, which is, strange and usually not working. So I titled it, I'm going backwards. Here we go. So I titled it Good, Bad, Ugly. It's easy, there's several segments of the development. I'm now in this push promoting use of data in newsrooms for 7 years. I know a lot of people from this community, and when they do surveys about, what journalism is, they always ask, are there more active data journalists? Because it seems like a very small community, and it's not like growing like as it should be. But still, this is a good part. This is from Simon Rogers from the golden times of the Guardian data blog. He kind of developed a workflow how we could cope with data on a daily basis. I always liked this approach. Simon Rogers, who is now with Google, had a very pragmatic approach. He said, I'm filtering out what are they having as data, and I'm trying to do something with it, and you can see it here. It can go to the graphics team, be a larger investigation, but sometimes he just published the data and asked experts to look into it. So I always thought that this pragmatic approach, a low-level approach that any journalist could do, is worthwhile. It's still worthwhile. Let me give you some more examples. When I show what you can do with data-driven journalism, I use this example from Business Insider of all sources. They have a tradition of doing presentations for Wall Street, as we know. But this one is a good one, because this is how data is presented when it has a commercial purpose. It's a typical hockey stick, things go up, future looks bright. And just by adding one more layer of data, the story changes decidedly, because this is the global internet population, as you can read. this is a comparison. And I think providing comparison for data points, is one of the essential things that we do. And this is not hard to do. It's just a little bit of work and digging into it. But it's not essentially something that is not possible. It should be possible for basically any journalist. And we're buying the Kool-Aid from, how people describe certain things too often, not showing these two sides. Let me go on. This is from a tweet from Sascha Venor. Zeit Online in Germany is by now pretty solid in using data for their reporting. They have trained more people in the newsroom to do charts than most that I know. And this is from a tweet that they didn't do it. It's a YouTube video from somebody, I guess, outside of journalism. And it's a comparison of how airlines make money in the ideal way if they sell every place, of course, and so on and so on. But what they're doing here is they are talking about the economics that surround us. Yeah, we're sitting in coach and we don't know how this airline flies. I don't know how the cheap airlines actually keep their planes up and do security and so. I don't know. And we don't know for a lot of areas in life. And how can we expect the public to wake up to the more serious issues if we fail to make what surrounds us better understandable? And you could, arguably it's a discussion, but this is a visual representation, of what we eat. Yeah, it's pretty graphic. Yeah, but it's sticking. Yeah, it is relatively simple. It's a good creative idea, and that is part of journalism as well. Telling good narrative, telling good stories, not necessarily being drowned by the problems of data and statistics and visualizations and technology and all the stuff that we are not allowed to do in our newsroom. So, and there are really good examples coming from outside journalism. I would like to give a very specific shout out to Max Roser, who is an academic who started this website, Our World is Changing, and he kind of created his own little line charts tool as developers, and what they do is really fabulous. They look at long-term development. A little bit like what made Hans Rosling so great, who sadly passed away recently. He was criticized in the statistic community to some extent for making it so accessible, for talking about data so that people could actually understand it. And this is really a great site. It shows us what we should be doing in the newsroom as well. So this whole development, that's still part of the good part, has resulted in quite a bit of newsroom being founded. We have people from ProPublica here in the room, which is not listed here but should, because it's one of the major initiatives in this space, has contributed greatly. So there was, for a time, an idea in the larger news organizations, we have to have a data team. There are even, arguably some contributions for that better journalism is winning. We had recently very good numbers from the FT for paying subscribers, 655,000 as far as I remember. This is an interesting switch that the New York Times, although it lost a lot of revenue from advertising, at least recouped some of that by being able to sell news content for subscription. Subscriptions are a hard sell. It's not easy. And we have, we should ask ourselves, what happens if all our websites try to sell a subscription? I'm not sure whether people will, subscribe to 5 or 10 newspapers. Subscriptions are essentially, even if they are low, people do the math. Oh, I have to pay it every month. So it's a hard sell. So on the other side, we have these things which evolved out of my favorite chart from, I think it was 2015, when the New York Times had the first thing where you could go into the New York Times and draw on almost any device for the relationship between income of parents and the education of the kid. And what they do very well is they learn from the successful things that they created and you prolong them. This is an example. If you do that, what happened under Obama's rule, you find how little you actually really know in terms of numbers. You make guesses all the time. And this is really an innovative format. You have to draw it yourself. And then it's compared like how the others did. I think that's an excellent way of telling a story about what is actually the reality. So that is, you have to draw, and then you get the comparison of what it really was. Usually it's surprisingly different. So much for what we know in an information society. So, sorry to bit, but now we're kind of going down. The bad part. It is possible today to drive around with a bus with large numbers that are really false, that are not true. And after the Brexit successfully was won for the Brexit proponent, they were saying, nobody told us that. And the Guardian and other newspapers said, yeah, we did, but nobody wanted to listen. And I think it's not a fallacy of statistics or numbers, it's a fallacy of narratives, of creating a narrative that is resonating with the large parts of the public in the type of common sense for the better. Yeah? It is possible to steer up people that are disgruntled with stuff with such numbers, whether it's true or not, and you can drive around a bus without being punished for that. And there's a deeper thing to that. That's a very interesting article to read. And by the way, we want to provide all our presentations on SlideShare, so we will be sending around links on Twitter after this session. So what this says is that certain parts of the public and certain groups in the political sphere are against experts. Essentially, they are saying experts are communicating with each other about stuff, you know, how the 1%, 2% can be staying afloat, but it's not related to us. And this results in stuff like this. That's an amazing chart. This is people being asked how many people they estimate, how many Muslims are living in their specific region. The dark blue parts are what the people said as a survey, as a gut feeling. Say, look at France, they say, oh, we have like at least 23% Muslims in the country. Reality, it's 8%. And it goes on like that. Everyone is overestimating the number of foreigners. And, you know, this is not hard to do, this chart. You know, there's no technology involved. It's part of the narrative. And there's an ugly part, and that's usually when I'm becoming a pariah. I think it's a fallacy of the journalism community to not discuss our own economies of the publishing houses. Yeah? We have a lot of people complaining, my organization is not doing it, it's too slow. It's not a question of money, it's a question of rethinking it. Newspapers have lost 4 or 5 of the pillars that made us money, like classifieds went to eBay, other stuff went to monster.com. Yeah? It all went to digital platforms. The current journalism generation in commercial media is told we need to make money with your stories. That is, you know, that was not true in the past. The money was made elsewhere and created some freedom for the larger publications to have long-form storytelling, to have long-time investigations. It is really, I don't think it's really possible to have an investigation that pays for itself. It's not how it's working. And this is why I single out this one. This is advice. It's service journalism, which is frowned upon. This is a Wirecutter, and they kind of look into products you can buy and give you advice. They hacked Amazon for that to make money. They have affiliate links, so when you follow the link, they get like between, I think, 7 to 9% of the revenue. They were recently bought by the New York Times for $30 million, 2 years after being founded. This is an interesting part, because what I always do is looking into the numbers and how these sites are advertising. This is how they create trust. In a world where, you know, essentially all these websites are, I tell you the truth, my friend, believe me, will be good, you know, buy with me, it's all good. Such a short section can build some trust if it then consistently worked upon. If you look into how they write about best TV, whatever, yeah, it's good. And I have a point, and then I'm finishing up with my short intro. We need, as journalists, track numbers better than officials. You know, we need to question basically everything and not take anything for granted. We need to transform those numbers, as shown with the Muslim example. We need to show what is not known. A lot of things are not known. Nobody knows the real cost of the Brexit, and I hate these question mark articles. Will the Brexit be costly? Yeah, of course, but now come on. You know, somebody please sit down to calculate it for the UK. There's a big opportunity in reducing the time to search. Yeah, all of us going here have potentially booked their own flights. You know, we're investing a lot of time into stuff that, you know, was done, shared by other people, you know, together. You know, today we're booking our own flights back and forth, and we're really accustomed to it. We're our own travel agents. Time to search there's a lot of time spent there, and if there's a good destination to go and get an answer and shorten the time to make a decision, like damn television, I know it's commercial, yeah, but it's a good example. It's an example, because the funny answer is 10 years after, how can we recoup some revenue? Write long text. The texts on Wirecutter are really, really long. So, and we need to do the math for the society because nobody else does it for the people. And there is no excuse in saying, I'm a journalist, I'm not good with math. That is really no excuse. So, final slide, summing up. I think I would like to propose a term I call public intelligence, promotional term, but it could be a counterbalance to something that the commercial companies already have. It's called business intelligence. It helps the likes of McDonald's and so greatly in finding out why my cafe is making more money than another setup and so and so. People are left alone. Yeah, they're still arguing from gut feeling, the large majority, and I think gut feeling in a connected society is not enough. So that's where journalists can actually excel, help, assist, and be there. Yeah, so thank you for that short introduction.
Okay, thank you very much, Marco. I'll also be moving around. I can sit down. Oh?
Yeah, get it closer.
I need to have it closer. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to now present, it needs to be really on my mouth, the initial results of the Global Data Journalism Survey. Could I just ask you guys to maybe raise your hand if you have heard about the Global Data Journalism Survey before this session? Okay, so pretty much half of the room hasn't heard about it. Okay, so I'm going to give a very brief introduction on what the Global Data Journalism Survey is. It is a Global Data Journalism Survey, so we want to study the state of data journalism globally and how data journalism is integrated or not integrated within different newsrooms across the world, and also maybe future directions that we see from the survey and the directions that we need to start moving towards. It is composed of around 48 questions in 7 different sections. It was launched in December 2016, and it will be closed at the end of April. So if you hadn't heard of it, and if you would like to participate and basically have your say or talk about or tell us about your newsrooms, it will be open until the end of this month, and this is the link to the survey. So today, okay, who can participate? Data journalists, but I also would like to encourage journalists who are not data journalists to participate. So far, as you will see from the results of the survey, we have been hearing mostly from the people who are interested in data journalism or consider themselves data journalism, and it could be because they feel more comfortable to start the survey. But I also would like to hear from the people who would think data is bad, for example. So we kind of will have a more balanced result here. So it is run by myself and by Mirko. Today I will be giving only a brief introduction, or not a brief overview of the results we have got so far. I am not going into any statistical analysis or relationship analysis, mainly because I didn't want to do the analysis twice, once today and once later. So it is more observation of what we have seen. The results will be published publicly, so everybody will have access to the results when they are published, and there will be some academics paper out of it too. Okay, so these are I've already said. To start, how many respondents we have had so far? We have had 174 responses, and 152 of them are complete responses. We discard anything that is not completed. We will not take them into consideration. Interesting thing so far is we have seen results from 37 countries so far, and here is the map of the countries who have participated in the survey and the number of people who have participated in the survey. Not surprisingly, we have seen most of participants coming from the US, and I personally believe that the US is the most advanced when it comes to data journalism. We have had the second largest population that we have had comes from the UK. I don't know if there's anybody here from the UK who, okay. Then is Europe overall. We have quite a few participants from Europe overall. And I actually probably should compare the overall number of Europe and the US maybe to see if there is more participants overall in Europe. Then we'll have here and there from Canada, from South Africa, from Central America, the rest of the world, basically. So overall, 37 countries, arguably. One of the participants has said Northern Ireland, and I have counted it as a country, so it could be considered UK, it could be considered Northern Ireland. And I live in Ireland, so I wouldn't really touch on that much. Okay, so where do they come from, the people who have participated in the survey? These are the types of people who have participated. We have 62% of the people who have participated are full-time. We have part-time participants, and we have quite a lot of freelance participants who work on data journalism, which I thought was very interesting to see. Nearly 20% of the participants are freelance. The size of organization is also interesting. We see all sorts of sizes of organization within our participants. We have small organizations who are one person, or they're probably freelance people. We also see a lot of people from large organizations. 30% of the participants, just over 30%, are from really, really large organizations, which I believe are the large news organizations that we have. Then we have a kind of spread of different sizes of organizations. What is the type of the organization that they work on? Most of the participants are coming from national news organizations. Then we have local and international, and very small number are from other, which again could be the freelance participants. This could be interesting. The medium that they publish on, online platform of broadcast or print media organizations, is the kind of highest number of gets the highest number of participants. And then we again have online-only publications. So we see that data journalism is mostly popular between online broadcasters. Online gets the highest number of data journalists, or highest amount of data journalism. TV gets just a little bit, 3%. Blogs, print magazines, print newspapers, also a little bit more than TV and radio. The primary area covered, most of them work in politics, so politics seems to be the interesting topic for data journalism. Then we see business is the second most, then world news is the fourth most interesting. So I'm going to go over this quite quickly. Status of data journalism, this I find very interesting. We have asked data journalists if they have a dedicated data team in their newsrooms. And we see that actually most of our participants, 43% of them, have a dedicated data blog, data team, data section in their news organizations, which I found very, very interesting and makes me quite happy in a sense. Then there's another 30% that they don't have a dedicated data section, but on a regular basis they publish data stories, which could be people, the news organizations who don't really think they want to invest, but automatically they have data stories. Or at the same time, it could be news organizations who believe data journalism could be fully integrated within the workflow of news production, and it doesn't need to have a separate data section. This I find very, very interesting. The number of people who are in the data teams. And I always am kind of, not surprised, but very, I find it very interesting to see most of the teams that work on data journalism actually have very small teams. So we hear a lot about news organizations that we can't do data journalism because of resources, which is true. But from the survey results, at least, we can see that if you have 1, 2, 3, 4 very good people, you could actually do a lot of data journalism. You don't need to have a team of 10, 15 people, 10, 15 data journalists to do good data journalism. So here we see that 33% or almost 34% of our participants have teams of 1 to 2. And another 37% are teams of 3 to 5 people. So most of data journalism is happening in small teams, and it doesn't need large teams necessarily. We have asked our participants about the activities, what is happening in the newsrooms when we are talking about data journalism, what is your day-to-day work, what is it that you do the most? And data analysis, interestingly, is what data journalists do the most. It is not data visualization, and we have had different sessions and panels in this festival. Mar was on one of them. That is not only about data visualization. Data analysis gets the highest portion of data journalism, and also what Mirko just mentioned, that you need to learn your maths, you need to learn your statistics if you want to work on data journalism. Interestingly, the second most kind of common activity is data collection or data gathering. Most of the time is spent on data gathering, or a lot of the time is spent on data gathering. Then is data cleaning. So you not only spend a lot of time on finding the data, you also spend a lot of time on cleaning the data, which are kind of the less fancy parts of data journalism, but they are very, very important in data journalism projects. One thing that I found interesting is writing and data visualization get actually the same rate, the same kind of ranking. Which is interesting because it means the communication of data journalism work could be in written form or could be in visual form. And one of the discussions that I normally have when I talk about data journalism is in newsrooms that don't have the culture of data journalism, they are very much used to text. And sometimes in data journalism there's an issue of byline. And the byline normally goes to the person who do the text and not the person who does the analysis and not the person who does the visualization. And recently, in the past couple of years, we are seeing the shared bylines, and news organizations are getting used to this idea of collaboration. So it is very interesting to see that actually visualization and writing gets more or less the same amount of work when we are talking about data journalism in data teams. The most common issues when we are dealing with data journalism project. What are they? The most common issues is data is not in a useful format or needs to be kind of worked on extensively or cleaned extensively. And I'm sure a lot of data journalists in this room would probably agree with the participants here that data not being in a good format or not being clean enough is one of the biggest problems. The second biggest problem is data is outdated, and that's what we see, for example, a lot in Ireland. Ireland has been kind of starting the data portal for the government, but when you go and look at the data, it is either really outdated or you actually don't know when it is from. Like you have no idea if it was updated a month ago or you have no idea if it was updated a year ago. So that's kind of a big problem when it comes to data journalism. And also data is incomplete. And as journalists, you often wouldn't want incomplete data because you can't really make claims, or at least as academics, we don't want incomplete data. And I think that's the same story for data journalists. Okay, we have asked our participants about when they are performing data projects, how they do it or how they collaborate with in-house and external collaborators. So we've asked, when you're doing data analysis, which is the biggest part of data journalism, it seems, how do you do it? And interestingly, most of our participants can do the statistical analysis by themselves, which makes me very happy. It means that most people can do statistics. Again, I think our results could be slightly biased because, as I said, people who felt more comfortable with data journalism have participated, and that's why I want to have people who feel less comfortable with data journalism also to participate, so maybe we get a more balanced view here. But so far, from 152 people, we can see that most of these people can actually run the statistical analysis by themselves, or they can collaborate with in-house statisticians or data analysts, which again kind of reinforces the culture of collaboration within newsrooms and with data journalism. Also, 7% hire external statisticians, which again is very good. 6% have never needed statistical analysis, which, yeah, these are probably people who don't really do much data journalism, because I don't think data journalism is really possible without any statistical analysis. Okay, then we've asked them about data visualization. When you're doing the data visualization for your work, how do you do it? And 50% produce a data visualization by themselves too, which is, again, I think very interesting. 41% collaborate with in-house visual designers, and a lot of news organizations have the culture of graphics team or visuals teams, and these are the people who kind of, now we see collaborations between data team and graphics team. 5% have external visual designers. Programming is one of the things that is discussed the most these days, and all journalists and data journalists are having this discussion that, should I learn to code? From the results, we see that actually 38% of data journalists can code themselves. Another 32% of projects have in-house programmers. So we are seeing that nearly 70% of the project involves some sort of a programmer. Either the data journalists can do it themselves or they have in-house programmers. I am one of the people who believe not every data journalist should be able to code. I mean, to be a data journalist, you don't have to be a programmer. It's good to know what is possible using programming, in my opinion, but I don't think you have to be a programmer. Okay, we have asked about the knowledge of data journalism. Maybe I ask in this room also. How many of you are data journalists in this room? Not many, okay. Then if I ask a question, it will have no statistical significance. All right, so most of the people who have participated in this study believe that they are better than average or expert when it comes to data journalism. However, still a good portion of people think that they are only average. 27%, nearly one-third of the participants, or between one-third and a quarter of participants think they are only average, which tells us probably with being only average, you still can do work, but many of them are above average or better than average. I was interested to see the level of education when it comes to data journalism, because I feel like how is it playing out? Is it more educated, or is it like our college graduates, or even not college, not people who haven't gone to college? And interestingly, we are seeing that most of the people have a master's degree. 54% of the participants have master's degree, which I actually found very, very interesting and actually quite strange, I have to say. Another 38% have a university degree. Very little have PhDs or high school or no degrees, okay? So data journalism seems to be a very educated in the sense when it comes to formal higher education training. A lot of really educated people are involved in data journalism. I would assume that this will change, and as it becomes more and more common within newsrooms, I would think that this might get bigger and this might get smaller. Maybe not, I don't know. Formal training in data journalism. It was very interesting. It was exactly 50-50. So 50% of the people have actually formal training in data journalism, while 50% have absolutely no formal training in data journalism. And it was really weird to get 50-50, actually. So we've asked the participants the level of formal training, which, again, I find very, very interesting. Most of the participants are journalists. They have formal training in journalism and not in computing, data science, computer science, statistics. So most of them come from data journalism, and most of them have no idea about machine learning. They have pretty much zero when it comes to machine learning, which I think is totally fine. Also to data science, statistics, a little bit better. They have some formal training in statistics, pretty much none to a little bit to coding, and data visualization is very kind of diverse in respondents. Again, so here I think what this is telling us is most of the data journalism is happening by journalists. There has been a lot of discussions on moving from journalism to coding and moving from coding to journalism. So I think this is telling us this has been so far moving at least from journalism to coding as opposed to moving from these technical guys, I'm one of them, to journalism. Okay? We have asked if they are interested in formal higher education degrees, and most of them say no. We are not interested. We are good. And because most of them maybe had already higher education training, but most of them don't want to have higher education degrees in data journalism. 40% want it. However, if shorter term higher education programs is offered, it seems like most people would actually like to go and get some formal training if it isn't a really full degree. Okay, so 74% of the participants would actually want to get training if it is a shorter term. A bit of a plug for ourselves at UCD. That's why we have started a certificate in data journalism in Ireland, and that would be the first one in Ireland. So this is a link if anybody is interested. Is anybody here from Ireland? Oh, okay. So if you like to go and be in Ireland for 9 months, this could be your short training. And if you're interested, you can come and talk to me afterwards about it. So just a few final slides here. We want to see how data journalism is influencing newsrooms. So we've asked a number of agree, disagree questions from data journalists to see how the culture of data journalism is changing the newsroom and how it is perceived to change the newsrooms. So we've asked data journalists or participants, who could be journalists, if they can produce more stories with data journalism, if data journalism causes producing more stories. And 65% agree or strongly agree that data journalism is helping their news organization to tell more stories. And we all know more doesn't necessarily mean better, but still, we get to that better too. Do you think data journalism adds rigor to your stories? And pretty much over 80% of journalists think data journalism adds rigor to the story. So you can do more, and you can do more rigorous. What else do you want? Okay? Is it increasing the quality of your work? So again, more doesn't necessarily mean better, but is it increasing the quality of your journalistic work? Again, most people, nearly 90%, think it is increasing the quality of journalistic work. Only 3% strongly disagree and 1% disagree somehow. As a final question that I'm presenting today, a lot of people are undermining the quality of journalism or traditional journalism. We have asked, is it undermining the traditional journalistic values? I was surprised. I thought many people will say yes. I was hoping some people will say yes so we can have a discussion on that. But again, pretty much 80-something% of participants say no. It is not undermining traditional journalistic values, which to me is good, but we can't have so much discussion on that. So these are the results that I wanted to present. Oh, I have one more. Oh, this is very interesting. How many? 70% of journalists or participants say they cannot live or work as journalists without data, which I find very, very interesting. So if data didn't exist, they wouldn't probably be journalists. Okay, or they can't do their day-to-day job without data as a source. The survey is still open, so if you agree or disagree or you just want to participate, it will be open until the 30th of April, and this is the link, DDJ Study 2017, bit.ly. So go and tell us maybe a little bit more, and so we kind of have a better idea of how it is going, and maybe if you're a journalist, that looks like a lot of people in this room are not data journalists, please go and participate so we get a better idea of how journalists overall are thinking about that. The final results will be presented in the European Data and Computational Journalism Conference, which will be held 6th and 7th of July in Dublin. So come and join us. Also, we are accepting academic papers and also pitches for industry talks. So if you're interested, until the end of this month, we are accepting talks and papers, so submit it to us. Okay, so that was the results of the survey. I'm not now going to just pass the mic to Mirko, and Mirko will tell us about Perugia Pledge. Thank you very much.
Yeah, this will be short. Thank you. It's kind of telling that in our industry built on data, we need to do our own surveys and build slowly into understanding what the structure of these data-driven newsrooms is, and how little there is so far. So this is another effort, community-wise, trying to create a common understanding. The Perugia Pledge is essentially a very open document on Google Docs. It's accessible to everyone who has a link, and there is a link, so no excuses. And we started it as asking a question. What is the basic 2-page document that every budding or existing, already working data journalist should have read? And the issue with that is we are not the ones to define that alone, like me or Bahare or everyone here on the panel. It would be great if we can build with an open document something like a greater understanding that has certain facets of good and bad and ugly in it to have a better understanding. So this is open now for how long? 4 weeks? People are a bit hesitant to actually, go into it, but I would like to encourage everyone. And actually, the next step will be, it is open, have a look. Right now, I wrote a few abstracts which are new. I think potentially even you haven't seen them, which are really dense things like familiarize yourself with the history of data visualization, and then very quick links to Playfair, Nightingale, and so on, which can take a talk in itself. But the idea is to speed up the understanding and provide newsrooms that are already practicing data journalism to give something to a young or older person to show what we mean, to quickly get people up to speed. And I would really hope that a lot of people participate, and I would encourage everyone who looks into it, go into it, leave a sentence, an abstract, a link, and leave your Twitter handle. We wrote that into the document. It has some instructions. Leave your Twitter handle. It would be great. Wow, how nice would that be if we, would have a remark from you or several. Yeah, why not? You're part of that as well. From you, from your experience, it is open. Let's see how that goes, whether it will be vandalized, going somewhere. I guess we need to push it to a certain extent, or we're prepared to do that, like data cleaning, what are the essential tools, and so on and so on. I think it should be kind of an informative, highly linked tool. That is my current suggestion. But if it changes over time, and for example, from we lose the investigative perspective there because I'm not really active in investigation, it would be really welcome to have some abstracts on how to approach big investigations, which we will be hearing about shortly. Yeah, that's it for the Perugia Pledge. I crossed out this that anybody needs to sign in and have left a comment, so maybe it's not that formal. A bit more introduction. Maybe we can put it back, whatever. If it's good enough, we can put a little line and you have to sign it, send it somewhere to Ireland. Have it shelved forever. This is my pledge. And we can pull it backward when they switch sides and go to Breitbart or whatever. Yeah, that's it for the Perugia Pledge. Another effort, another try, another push. So you're really all welcome to participate in that. Okay. What's next?
We just move on to the panel now. So.
Okay. Yeah, okay. You listened long enough. We will have something from you as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah. What is your experience? I mean, there are more facets to it. We have one facet, which is the Data Journalism Awards, which will be a bit longer. But you are working on something that is highly interesting and made a lot of big headlines, which is big international investigations. Can you tell us a little bit about your recent experience?
Sure. Great. So we're talking about many things in this session, and I was invited by Harry and Mirko to share the experience that we've had in the ICIJ in the past years, because I think that it fits and it speaks of a trend that we're seeing of how collaborative journalism is actually trending in our industry. Just as a way of background, I work at the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, and people don't normally know who we are, and I normally have to say the people from the Panama Papers, and then everybody knows who we are. So anyway, the reality is the Panama Papers just the latest thing we've done. ICIJ was created 20 years ago by a guy called Chuck Lewis, a journalist called Chuck Lewis from the US, who had to set up a center in nonprofit investigative center in Washington to investigate US policy and follow the money in the US. And he started seeing how his stories ended up having all these connections around the world, and met with a few international journalists in Nieman in Harvard, and they decided to have, instead of do the traditional way that newspapers would do, is, oh, something breaks in Syria, let's send my US great reporter to Syria to see what's happening there. Instead of sending correspondent and parachuting journalists into places, they decided that the best way to gather the local knowledge is through local journalists. So he formed this team in 1997 of reporters around the world that would join forces in investigations. Imagine 1997, pre-Google, pre-Facebook, pre-anything any technology that we see today. And Back then, it was a team of lone wolf investigative reporters that just wanted to collaborate to really make their investigations better. But the main change for ICIJ, even though we've been working on for 20 years, has been the technological change that we live in. And in the past years, I've been with ICIJ for the past 6 years, we've seen a great change in the way we do investigations and the way we do collaborative investigations. Because when I joined in ICIJ 6 years ago, I was assigned to do an investigation on fishing industry in Spain, because it's one of the most powerful fishing industries in the world, receives a lot of EU subsidies. And back then, the assignment was, oh, you should investigate the lobbying, and you should just track who's really exerting influence into the EU, and why do they get so much money, and why is the money going to rogue players. And it ended up being that the only thing that we could prove in a systematic way was how the money flowed from the EU to Spain and to the Spanish fishing industry, and how many of those players were actually being sanctioned. So it ended up being a data story, even though it wasn't a data story from the beginning. And I've seen this happening over and over and over again in the past 6 years in my work at ICIJ. Stories start from a non-data perspective, and all of a sudden, data becomes a core component. That doesn't matter. I've seen that happening in big investigations that come from public documents. We did an investigation a couple of years ago called Evicted and Abandoned, which started with a tip from a source saying that the World Bank was funding projects that displaced people from their homes or economically, with money meant for development to improve their lives, and it was actually making it worse. And that tip from a source was passed on to a very traditional investigative reporter in our newsroom, who started talking to people, looking at the documents. And immediately it became a data project where through months, after months of shifting through documents, we were able to prove how World Bank funded projects had been displacing around 3.4 million people in a decade. So projects meant for development and for improving people's lives, and that's mainly the World Bank mission, were basically failing the World Bank mission because they were just making lives of people worse, because they were displacing them from their homes or displacing them economically. And that we were only able to prove because instead of shifting through documents, printing all the documents and looking at them and started highlighting, we were able to actually systematize the information in those documents that came from public, from the public domain, the World Bank website. We were able to systematize that and try to come up with what was happening, measure how big was it, what was happening, and then kind of speak of very specific issues, and gathered the first ever database on this issue, which, by the way, has changed the way the World Bank is looking at this topic. So every single project we've been doing has had more and more a data component, to the point that 3 years ago we decided to create a data team, and that's the data team that we have right now, which started with 3 people. So we were one of those small teams that did data journalism, and now we are 7.5 people, and that amounts to, I have a midget, midget you say? Actually I'm the half, I'm only 1.5 meters. No, we have a part-time person. We have a part-time person working, so that's the half. But 7.5 people, and we amount to 50% of the ICIJ permanent staff. So that also speaks of how important it's become for our organization to have data in the investigations. And I think that we are a good example of what's happening also in other investigative teams. The composition of my team, just as a way of background, is half developers, so computer engineers coming to journalism, and then half is journalists that have learned how to code, how to work with statistics and data. And it's in this environment that we got the Panama Papers. We have been dealing with leaks previously, and we had been working on with the newsrooms around the world to do collaborations like we used to do, or like we've been doing for 20 years, but using data and technology to help those collaborations. And the Panama Papers was the biggest thing we got, actually received by a German newspaper called Süddeutsche Zeitung. they basically thought, okay, this is too big for us to handle. We don't have a data team. They later hired somebody, by the way, but like they didn't have a data team. They didn't know how to deal with 2.6 terabytes of data, 11.5 million files. They saw connections to more than 200 countries in the world, and they were like, wow, we don't know how to deal with this. And it would be front page in my newspaper for several days, but we think this is bigger. So it's not the first time media organizations have come to us. Le Monde came to us previously, and other people have come to us with information that they've seen. This is connected to my country, but I think this is important for some other people too. So we've tried to apply these methodologies that we've been developing for so long to not just public data, but also private data or leaks. Because what's a fact is that there's a high trend of massive electronic leaks that they've been dumped into the internet, given to organizations like WikiLeaks, or now more recently given to also journalists, right? But it's important to note that in this trend of like massive amounts of data being exposed to the public in some ways, we're no longer the only gatekeepers of data, right? Data doesn't have to come through journalists to go out in the public. If there's a Sony hack, it can go directly to the internet and people can get access to that. So anyway, in that sense, we've tried to apply that to this new reality where getting a massive electronic leak, it's easy, quote unquote easy, and processing it, it's the complicated part. The Panama Papers is not the unique effort or a unique effort in this. I just wanted to share with you our experience because that's what I know about. But the reality is that it was an interesting collaborative effort of around 400 journalists. Now, actually, the amount is around 500 that have joined afterwards in around 80 countries for more than 100 media organizations collaborating together on a project for a year. There would not have been any other way to do this than collaborating. A year, I know, for many journalists sounds like a lot of time. And I'm super happy that we got a year, but a year for 11.5 million files is very little. So that's why we kind of like distributed the responsibility so that we all dealt with it at the same time and tried to look at it faster. There have been other efforts to do collaborations while we were doing the Panama Papers or afterwards. I think that it's worth noting that ProPublica, who Scott Klein is here, in the second row, did this amazing effort called Election Land with more than 1,000 reporters. I don't know the exact numbers, Scott knows them, but more than 1,000 reporters working together on the same day, on election day, trying to make sense of a weird voting system in the US and whether the elections were rigged. And there are other interesting initiatives. For example, there's the European Investigative Collaborations, which is a network that was formed in Europe by Der Spiegel and trying to join other media organizations, where they've been doing work to try to make sense of European topics like weapon trading and where do the weapons of like in Europe come from, and that end up being in these terrorist attacks that we unfortunately had in the past years, but also trying to work with massive amounts of information and leaks like football leaks. So there are a lot of efforts, and I think we're going to start seeing more and more of those. What's interesting in that is these big investigations that we are hearing about, most of them have this core data component. So I would dare to say, and please tell me if you feel differently in the question time, I would dare to say that it's very difficult for me to think of investigative journalism today without an important data component. If investigative journalism is about exposing wrongdoing that happens in a systematic way, how on earth are we going to prove systemic issues without data? And I think I'm happy to be an investigative data journalist in this time because I think it's becoming clearer and clearer for everyone. And I think that many have fought for this for a long time. And it wasn't that easy to make this point for a long time. I see challenges ahead that I just wanted to outline before giving Marianne the word, which I think I would like us to think about as we move forward. because we're here to talk about the future, right? Or where are we heading? Well, I would love us to solve these issues together. One of the main issues to me right now is it's great. We now have examples of big collaborations and how collaborations have helped sort through massive amounts of data, whether it's public or private, and try to make sense of it in a fast way. How do we get more people to collaborate with each other, but especially the networks that are being formed? How do we get the networks to collaborate with each other? How important is competition? How can we get beyond competition to really make sense of the screwed up world that we have around us? Which leads me to the other point, which is, if we really want to collaborate in a deep way, we're going to have to start sharing more of the data that we have on a regular basis. I think that those examples that I've been citing, Panama Papers, Electionland, Ike project with football leagues, they're all based on one thing, right? So one thing, Panama Papers league, one thing, election data, one thing, football leagues. But all these organizations and all these networks have a lot of wealth of knowledge, a lot of documents, a lot of data that, if they were to be put together or matched in some sort of way, would allow us to even go beyond an active collaboration based on a single topic or single event. How could we do that so that, of course, we're still kind of like in a market that it's competitive, but how could we do that in a way that it helps us make more sense of the world around us? And that also leads me to, that's a collaboration and human problem, because after all, there are humans and we all have bosses and egos and things that we have to deal with. But at the same time, it's a technological problem, right? What is the tech that we need to make those collaborations happen while we keep the egos on check? So I think that that's what I wanted to talk about, and I'm looking forward to hearing all your thoughts and further the discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Yay. No, it's fine. I'm going to stay. Okay. I'm going to stay here, but I'm going to need the clicker though. The clicker? Yeah. Cheers. All right. I agree with so much of what has been said so far, and I hope that what I will be talking about will comfort your views and bring you some new ideas. My name is Marianne Bouchard, and I run a data journalism nonprofit called HIDA. Hold on a sec.
Does it have a presenter view? Yes, it has. Could you
need to go on the view tab. Yep. Enter full screen.
At the end, last one.
The last option.
That one. Or slide.
No.
If it's full screen, you can't use the clicker, I don't think. But
I think so, no? Can you click?
I can click. Yo. Cool. All right. The three main actions we have this year with HIDA. Our first data journalism training with an agency called CFE, based in France and deployed by the French government to help media organizations in various countries around the world to be more innovative. And so we are doing a data journalism training in Southeast Asia this year, going to Malaysia, Cambodia, and Philippines to teach data to journalists there. The second big project we've got is funded by the Innovate Africa Fund, and it's a censor journalism toolkit for African newsrooms. And that's exciting because we're going to be building bots. But the main project we're working on at the moment is managing the Data Journalism Awards competition organized by the Global Editors Network every year. And what's great is that the DGA gives you a good idea of what's happening in the world of data journalism worldwide. And the way it works, basically, is that people apply, obviously, usually between November, December, and the month of April. Last year, we had around 471 applications coming from about 50 different countries, representing the 5 continents. And I looked up the data while you were talking earlier to try and see the share of big and small organizations. And actually, last year, it was half-half. So half of the people who applied came from very large organizations, and half The other half came from organizations that have a staff under 25. And then the shortlist process starts, and the jury announces winners of the competition during a ceremony that happens at the Gen Summit, this time in June, in the lovely city of Vienna, in Austria. Previous winners of the past 3 competitions are all on that screen. And they include BuzzFeed, Quartz, the New York Times, The Guardian, but also ProPublica, and La Nación, but also smaller organizations like Ojo Publico, sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, Civio Foundation, Ojo Publico, Civio Foundation, sorry, and Convoca. And that's great, because it's not just about the big teams. The Data Journalism Awards works like a reference of the best data-driven projects from the past year, from both big and smaller organizations. And it's very inspiring because it shows you how small teams make it work on their own. And in various countries you wouldn't come across if you on your day-to-day life. Next. Of course, we've seen incredible work over the years, such as this one by 538 in the US, and the lovely Panama Papers Mar just talked to us about, and BuzzFeed News, who did that great story. But here is an example by the Civio Foundation, that is a very small team, and they made this investigation on the gap in global access to health. And I invite you to check it out. And they are a very small team that they made it happen and made something very impressive. So you don't need $1 million to make something work. Another example is this project called Breathe by India Spend. Maybe some of you have heard of it because they presented this week at Perugia. This project based on sensor technology that captures air pollution in India. And they are doing a great job, and they are a very small team and being very innovative in the technology they use to do data-driven journalism. Anyone who goes onto the Gen community where people submit the project can see that the competition we have that is still running this year, the Data Journalism Awards 2017 is still open, and we already have over 400 projects coming from all over the world, and various countries, including China, Afghanistan, Korea, Pakistan, India. I can't name them all. It's pretty impressive this year. And obviously, we also have the big players in Europe, the UK, since they are not in anymore, and the US. I'm sure that the survey presented earlier will correlate some of these trends, and we did mention a few of them already in the presentation, but over the past few years, what we've seen in the projects that were submitted to the competition is mainly those 3 trends that are interactive storytelling, so data teams trying to be more and more engaging and getting the readers more active in the consumption of their news, including data-driven news, news apps to try and make it to mobile, and big collaborations, including the Panama Papers, but other projects as well. And the trends that we are excited about for the future are VR data journalism. We hope to see some of them this year in the competition, and 360 or drone data journalism, and also obviously more of holding governments accountable. A few other examples on that screen are also people who took part in the competitions in previous years. I'd like to, well, that's my last slide. Just let you know that the deadline for the competition is this Monday. We've pushed it especially for Perugia, and that we have a Slack team going on about data journalism. So if you want to get in, just send me an email and I'll invite you. We're having nice discussions every month about data journalism. There you go.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
So we're good in time. Like we have another 15 to 20 minutes to discuss a bit, and we would like to engage more with you. As you have seen, we have, the most interesting facets: training and education, big global collaborative investigative project, which is a new thing, and then I think the contribution that the Data Journalism Awards are delivering over the years, because it was not a one-time thing, I think that is really important. Would you agree that by now being in its 5th or 6th year?
6, yeah.
Yeah. Would you see any additionally to what you said, a very specific pattern in this year's contributions?
We haven't got a chance to analyze the results yet, but we do see a lot more of technology advancement in the project that are submitted. So we have some really cool interactive projects coming up using VR and immersive journalism techniques and all that.
So I would provide the opportunity to ask questions to keep the, you might, wonder about something, want to contribute something. Is there anybody wanting to say something?
I want to talk about training.
Let's see if anybody from... There's no questions. I actually have a couple of questions here, and then we kind of move on to training. I want to ask Mar, basically. Here we're talking about collaboration, and you're seeing collaboration as one of the important kind of future directions in data journalism. And Marianne, you also mentioned collaboration. Would you also see, I think a lot of collaboration that is discussed, it's collaboration with the newsrooms. And as an academic, I think coming into this discussion, would you see the collaboration between academia and news industry and newsrooms as a kind of another way forward that could help data journalism to kind of move on to a more maybe rigorous or more interesting sphere, basically?
Okay, so this is a very interesting question, but it's also reminding me about something that I wanted to say, which I didn't. So I'm going to do the political way of like answering something different, and then I'll get to your point. You're saying the collaborations we've done is collaborations between newsrooms. One thing that we've seen that it's interesting is how we've been collaborating with investigative reporters, and over the past years, those teams of investigative reporters have become more and more populated with data journalists, to the point that Süddeutsche Zeitung didn't have a data reporter when they got the Panama Papers, and then like 2 months in the collaboration, they were like, I think we need to hire a data journalist, and actually kudos to them, because they actually wanted to hire a women data journalist. Great for thinking on diversity. But we've seen that much more. We've seen The Guardian now. Helena Bengston also is joining the investigations. She joined Panama Papers and so on. And in each investigation, I'm seeing those teams formed by investigative journalists more in connection to, or that have or bring the data resources that they have in the newsroom. So it's not just that we're seeing these collaborations internationally, it's that I'm seeing that these investigative teams have also understanding that in order to be able to be good investigative teams, they need these data resources. What I'm still to see is more collaboration inside their own newsrooms. Sometimes I'm getting a lot of feedback from the newsrooms that we work with, which is, oh, the investigative team kept this a secret for like a year, and then they came to us 15 days before, and they wanted a special website with special interactives. No, that's not the way it works, right? So I think that even like collaboration inside newsrooms, it's something that has to be more developed, so that investigative teams don't work the old way of like, oh, we're keeping this a secret and nobody knows, which is great for maintaining a secret over a year. But if you really want to have a great digital output, you cannot involve your digital team at the end, because then things take time, right? So I'm now personally invested in spreading this knowledge in every collaboration that we do, so that by using our example, right, of how we work and how we bring digital and how we bring data at the beginning of each project. So there's still some work to be done on that front inside our houses. I think that there's some work to be done with people outside our house. I think we're still too early because we still have shit to deal with in-house, right? ICIJ is a media organization. We've been approached after Panama Papers. We were approached by everybody in the world wanting to have access to data, mainly governments. So governments came to us and said, oh, we want a copy of the Panama Papers because we want to prosecute these people, or we want to investigate these people. Right. Our point of view is that we are not a branch of government. We don't actively work with governments and prosecutors by giving the whole data. It's a data issue in some part because it's for data protection, source protection, for source protection. If I give 11.5 million files to the IRS, the tax agents in the US, having access to 11.5 million files, you can know a lot about how the data was obtained and who was potentially the source, even though the source of the Panama Papers is an anonymous source. And that's the same challenge when we've been approached by academics. There have been papers done on Panama Papers and our previous investigations, and a lot of people, or even software development companies, come to us and say, hey, we have this great software, or I've been investigating tax havens for 20 years of my life. This is the data I really want to get access to. How can I collaborate with you? And so far, we've been trying to apply that same approach to everybody that comes to us. Again, it's an issue of trust. A lot of this works based on trust. And it's already hard to trust reporters. How are we going to amplify that trust to people outside of media? But it's an issue that we need to think about because it limits our investigative power. And that's my personal point of view. But we also have, an organizational perspective, which is we don't share with anybody that is not a journalist.
I wanted to add something when you were saying about 15 days before they actually plan to publish. One aspect that we hadn't discussed yet is the use and development of software in media, like learning to develop software. Because the paces of a newsroom and the pace of software development are not the same. Journalists tend to say, oh, we need to do this week, and then there's a deadline there. That's how they operate, like on very short time frames, 2 days, 3 days, a week. A 3-month investigation is, for most journalists, it's like a dream, but they never experienced something like that. But we cannot only, and it's not criticism, we cannot only rely on the likes of Google and others to develop, usable software for us and then, later complain that there are leaks in the leaks and that kind of stuff. We need to learn to develop software that advances the options for the journalists. And that is something that is an entirely new thing. It's not the IT in the media company, which we all have, but kind of dedicated developers in the newsroom. And whether these are journalists or not, there's a collaborative aspect. I think the best developers should do the development and not just dabbling a little bit with it. So that's one of the bad parts about learning. You need to really be productive. And that is another profession. I can fully understand some journalists being critical about being asked to learn to code. They should not walk away from it right away. They should, for example, be proficient with R, not just with Excel. I mean, in most of my trainings, Excel is a thing. Like, you're opening up Excel for the first time, or shall I show you the basic guide? That is not enough. That is my point. Software development in newsrooms.
And in that sense, you're making a great point. One thing, like our team, and they have questions here, and there are a few people that raised their hands, but just to add to that, in our experience in ICIJ, I have 4 developers, 4.5 developers in my team, and I would say that at least 50% of their efforts are invested in developing tools and software to help others. And that is also like a great challenge of how do you communicate that. We recently had an internal retreat on ICIJ, and we were talking about the future of the organization. And one of the main criticisms from traditional reporters were, you're getting all these resources. And we were like, yeah, but actually we're helping you become a better journalist. So that's also a struggle in understanding that and explaining that in the newsroom.
All right. On the topic of, is that working fine? On the topic of, collaborations, I've got four links for you, four things to go and look for. The first one is the European Data Journalism Network initiative that is just launching, that will try and solve some of those issues, because network. The other one is, hold on a sec. The European Data Journalism Hub, that is going to be another resource out of the same initiative coming out of Europe. The third one is Google D&I project I'm working on called the International Data Journalism Hub, that aims at being this big collaborative platform where data journalists from around the world can come and not just find resources about data journalism and how to do it or what's going on today, but also ways to collaborate between each other. And so earlier on today, we're talking about what about we just come together and trying to merge data sets from big investigations and see how they could match together and how we could go one step further in the editorial line associated with those data sets. Well, that might be the answer to that. And it's funded by Google D&I. And the last point I wanted to make, I forgot about, so I might say it later. Sorry, guys.
Okay, we all, I think, love to talk about training, but before we do that, and we may not get any time to do that. Obviously, I am from academia, so I love the most. I just want to see if there are any questions, because I saw some... you have a microphone already. Yeah. Excellent.
Just wanted to ask about those collaborations that you mentioned. Do you use any technological tools for that? I mean, your basic fuel there is your data. Do you have a technological tool that you use to share your data in a controlled way? And if not, if yes, what is that? If not, is it because they don't exist, because they're too expensive, because, I don't know.
Okay. Can I just, do we have any more questions to ask them all in one place and then see how much we can, microphone if could be here, please.
I have a question for you. In your opinion, which is the percentage of a newsroom in Europe where there is a data journalist?
What was that, sorry?
The percentage.
Yeah, percentage.
Percentage, thank you. Of a newsroom in Europe where there is a data journalist.
Okay.
Okay, so this is a very long, a question that could lead to a very long discussion.
A book.
I will encourage you to look at the video of another panel that we did just specifically about that, which was data infrastructures for journalism or for collaborations. It was, and there's a whole video. You have it in my Twitter feed. Also, I just tweeted about it a couple of days ago, if you want a more detail. And I'm happy to talk to you about this afterwards. But I think that there are a few things that we need to have in mind when collaborating. And the main thing we need to ask ourselves first is, what is the threat model around my collaboration? What are the threats around my collaboration? For example, which is a security thing, right? I'm investigating EU subsidies with newsrooms all around Europe, and it's EU subsidies, it's public data. Well, your threat model, like your threat is actually very low. Why don't you just use the great collaborative tools that Google, spends millions or billions on, and there's nothing better than Google Docs, or Google spreadsheets. And if somebody knows, please come and tell me. And I don't get any Google money. I'm just saying based on experience. Then if you think that you could get hacked, you don't want Google to have, your data. I mean, then you start thinking, okay, what are the other tools? The other question that you need to ask is, how technical are my users? Who's going to be in the collaboration? How technical they are? And then, how much money do I have? Because there are tools for everything in this world, but some of them cost a lot of money. And, I always say, journalists, we're poor. We're poor people, and we're not like big corporations that can invest thousands of dollars in software, right? So whenever thinking tools, I would ask myself those three things. In our case, threat modeling, let's pick the Panama Papers because we've already mentioned it several times. We identified that the governments and the NSA were not are going to be our enemies, at least at the beginning. Later, when the close circle of Putin came around in the data, we started like rethinking this. But NSA, the NSA was not going to be our enemy. Therefore, we decided to go with cloud-based infrastructure. We decided to use some sort of security around that, but using a cloud-based infrastructure. Then the other question, who are my users? My users range from reporters who have an iPhone because, their grandson gave it to them for Christmas, but they don't know what to do with the iPhone. But they're great reporters, and they get, actually these great reporters that many of them are not technically savvy are the ones getting the big leaks, which is fascinating. And then on the other range, I have developers, right, who know how to query data, do magic, and anything else, right? So my tools need to cater to those ranges of the spectrum. And I don't have money. So basically, we try to go to open source tools for the money perspective, but also so that we can adapt it to our needs. So there's a great piece in the Panama Papers microsite, which is panamapapers.icij.org, that explains how what are the tools we use to wrangle the data and work with the data. So if you want names, you have the names there, but in reality, the needs, no matter what the tools you use, the needs are three. One, you want your team to communicate to each other, right? And again, what is your threat model? Are you okay with Slack having access to your data? Then use Slack, How much is of a long term is, because Slack can get messy if you're working over a year there, right? We used a software for social networking based on open source tool software called Oxwell. Second need, you want people to have access to the documents and the data. Many tools for that. We used an open source tool called Solar for the indexing and Blacklight for the front end. Third need, visualizing. We're dealing with complex topics. Just searching through documents, you're going to miss a lot of connections. We used with graph database Neo4j and a software called Linkurious to visualize the connections of people and companies. Those three needs, I think, are in any collaboration, whether it's graphs or you want to have graphics or you want to have pie charts and line charts, whatever. So there are many, many tools. And again, that goes to a whole different panel, but I hope that gives a short overview.
Thank you.
All right. I want to come back to what I said earlier because I remember the fourth link, right? This collaborative platform that is launching right now. I think you can get better access to it. It's called Flourish. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but it's a project that is also supported by Google. They're everywhere anyway, and in a good way. And it's a platform that enables newsrooms to use data visualization templates, so that when you're in the newsroom and you spend 6 months creating a very intricate data visualization, and then you publish it, and then what? Nothing happens, and at the back of your mind that you could be reusing that code to do something similar. Maybe some other data sets could be plugged into it, but nothing really happens and no one really does anything. But Flourish has been created so that this platform can exist where newsrooms can go onto that site, upload their own data visualizations. The data is scraped out of it so that it becomes a template, and other people can use those visualizations for another project or something similar, or maybe the same project but with data sets from another country. And on the other side, data teams or just journalists who have to really produce a data visualization quickly can go and find templates of all of those visualizations that have already been done and see whether the data set it needs to publish tomorrow can be visualized straight away in one of those templates. So that's a really good tool and a really good platform that's coming up. And it's going to be free for journalists, thanks to Google. So that's cool.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. We are pretty much out of time, basically. I'm just going to ask everybody maybe to, in 30 seconds or no more than 1 minute, tell us, in terms of training, how do you think journalists should start?
Me.
Okay, hold on.
All right.
In 30 seconds, how do you think journalists should start? And also, if you see any, what was your question? Predictions.
In 30 seconds, you want to...
No.
I don't have. Maybe we should
Can you
start
put my
a whole
slide?
new session. The what?
No data, just gut feeling.
Just gut feeling, yeah. Just let's not go on slides because it's
all right, training. A lot of training is needed. Basic training is very much needed. For new generations, there are great courses right now, like bachelor degrees or whatever, that integrate data journalism modules in it, so that's cool, hooray. But for media professionals, they don't have time to just spend another 3 years learning data journalism, so you have all of those smaller trainings happening and lots of MOOC online, free MOOCs, like you have no excuse not to get the skills because it's free. And there was one going on like a few weeks ago. It was led by Alberto Cairo, who is like the guru of data visualizations, and it was amazing. And there are other ones going on, one in Asia, a MOOC led by HKU, that is really good, with really good experts in it. And the problem today with training in data journalism is that there's a lot of lecturing, especially in developing countries and countries outside of the US and EU, and people go and sort of lecture what data journalism should be, and there's not lots of practical product out of it. And I think that what is needed is more of a project-based training in data journalism, where people can actually come to that training and make something happen, rather than just learn some new skills and then go to the newsroom and forget all about it and don't know how to apply it. And so that's why I'm taking part in a program that's called 4M Asia training program, organized by CEFI. And we are going to Southeast Asia to teach data journalism, but project-based. So people come to the training with an idea. Even if they don't know anything about data journalism, they're just like, I want to do something about poverty in my country. Okay, so what data sets do you need to find? What are the skills you need to get? What sort of data visualization we can do out of it? And so that they have something more practical happening. And I hope that's going to be more successful. That's it.
Great. ICIJ is not a training organization, but what we've seen is every time we start a new project, there are skills to be taught. So we've started doing a lot of training ourselves in the data team, trainings on how to use Excel, trainings on how to convert PDFs to Excel, trainings on how to match data, match big lists, trainings on security. A lot of data teams are also doing security. So that's also something to keep an eye for the future, is how, because we're the people that know how to deal with computers in the newsroom, they look at us like, oh, you also must know PGP. And the reality is we do. So that's one of the trends that we should look at in the future. It's the security aspect and how security we've seen with the work we do in data. And a lot of what we do is this training by doing, which is basically, okay, we have Panama Papers, there are spreadsheets, how to deal with spreadsheets. Oh, you want to look to see if any of the MPs in your country are in the Panama Papers? Here's how you do it. This is how you do it in our platform, but here's how you do it locally. We've done some surveys around what they've learned, and a lot of the respondents learned a lot about security. I would love to know more about security from ICIJ. And what I can tell you is, having done myself a lot of trainings and having received myself a lot of data journalism trainings, it happens the way Marianne said it. I go up to a conference like this, I learn, I go back, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to apply it, and then routine kicks in. The good thing about the training by doing approach that we're doing in ICIJ is that we have this captive audience that really want to get it done because they think it's a great project. They have the great excuse to apply it on, and they end up learning. Not only they end up publishing a great project, but also learning a lot of skills in the way. So we're thinking a lot about, okay, how can we do more active training, since we have this captive audience that really wants to learn because they have an excuse to learning for, and apply it throughout like a year. So that's one thing about training, and I have to say that it's also important, the language issue. We're doing trainings in French for Africa, in Spanish for Latin America. We're trying to see how we expand more and help more trainings in Southeast Asia, there's a lot of training to be done in those countries through projects, and at the same time, it also helps for training to get like a very, let's say, medium-sized newspaper in Africa to work at the same level of The Guardian, in the same place, right? Because then they learn from each other and they get inspired. And what The Guardian does with matching properties to Panama Papers, they're like, oh, I want to do it that too. And then they learn from each other in that sense.
It would be really nice if that could really happen.
That's happening.
Yeah, but I've heard, well, some people like would collaborate, like newsrooms in Africa would collaborate with big names in, you know, in Europe or in the US, but in the end, African journalists taking part would end up not really being able to do as much, and because of training, because of non-access.
Right, so what's happening
that,
is, and we're thinking about how to do this
trying
more in
to
an
put them
active way,
all on the same level.
But the thing is, this is already happening. So we now want to have an active mind of like, how can this help through also like the training perspective? So yes, let's see next year. That's my prediction for next year.
Okay.
Okay, I think
we're good. We need to wrap up. They're gonna keep us out.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for staying. Thank you, guys.
Marianne.
So much for what we know in an information society. Well, sorry to bit, but now we're kind of going down. The bad part. It is possible today to drive around with a bus with large numbers that are really false, that are not true. And after the Brexit successfully was won for the Brexit proponent, they were saying, nobody told us that. And the Guardian and other newspapers said, yeah, we did, but nobody wanted to listen. And I think it's not a fallacy of statistics or numbers, it's a fallacy of narratives, of creating a narrative that is resonating with the large parts of the public in the type of common sense for the better. Yeah? It is possible to steer up people that are disgruntled with stuff with such numbers, whether it's true or not, and you can drive around a bus without being punished for that. And there's a deeper thing to that. That's a very interesting article to read. And by the way, we want to provide all our presentations on SlideShare, so we will be sending around links on Twitter after this session. So what this says is that certain parts of the public and certain groups in the political sphere are against experts. Essentially, they're saying experts are communicating with each other about stuff, you know, how the 1%, 2% can be staying afloat, but it's not related to us. And this results in stuff like this. That's an amazing chart. This is people being asked how many people they estimate, how many Muslims are living in their specific region. The dark blue parts are what the people said as a survey, as a gut feeling. Say, look at France, they say, oh, we have like at least 23% Muslims in the country. Reality, it's 8%. And it goes on like that. Everyone is overestimating the number of foreigners. And, you know, this is not hard to do, this chart. You know, there's no technology involved. It's part of the narrative. And there's an ugly part, and that's usually when I'm becoming a pariah. I think it's a fallacy of the journalism community to not discuss our own economies of the publishing houses. Yeah? We have a lot of people complaining, my organization is not doing it, it's too slow. It's not a question of money, it's a question of rethinking it. Newspapers have lost 4 or 5 of the pillars that made us money, like classifieds went to eBay, other stuff went to monster.com. Yeah? It all went to digital platforms. The current journalism generation and commercial media is told we need to make money with your stories. That is, you know, that was not true in the past. The money was made elsewhere.
Initial results of the 2017 Global Data Journalism Survey, and if you haven't participated in it, there's still time, so don't worry about that. We will then kind of start a panel discussion that Mirko will be moderating on the state of data journalism and where it is heading, where Marianne and Mar will kind of help us have a very nice and interactive session. We will also be talking about Perugia Pledge, which is kind of a crowdsourced initiative that we have started asking journalists to kind of tell us how data journalism should be and kind of some, not rules exactly, but some opinions on how we should go forward, that Mirko will moderate that. And we are hoping to get a little bit of an interactive session with you guys for that. So I will just be passing it on to Mirko, and we'll be talking about data journalism.
Yeah, I get up for that. I need to move.
Me too. This doesn't go off.
So this might be redundant for some of you, and you have heard it or whatever, but our experience is that with the many facets of how we can use and deploy data in the newsroom, there needs to be a common understanding, a push for how we can get started. Because we have too many journalists who are like watching it, knowing it. I do a lot of trainings, and very often they come in and say, yeah, I heard about it, but never did it. And then I have the second observation is once they never did it, second day they want to do a big interactive project. which is, strange and usually not working. So I titled it, I'm going backwards. Here we go. So I titled it Good, Bad, Ugly. It's easy, there's several segments of the development. I'm now in this push promoting use of data in newsrooms for 7 years. I know a lot of people from this community, and when they do surveys about, what journalism is, they always ask, are there more active data journalists? Because it seems like a very small community, and it's not like growing like as it should be. But still, this is a good part. This is from Simon Rogers, from the golden times of the Guardian data blog. He kind of developed a workflow how we could cope with data on a daily basis. I always liked this approach. Simon Rogers, who is now with Google, had a very pragmatic approach. He said, I'm filtering out what are they having as data, and I'm trying to do something with it, and you can see it here. It can go to the graphics team, be a larger investigation, but sometimes he just published the data and asked experts to look into it. So I always thought that this pragmatic approach, a low-level approach that any journalist could do, is worthwhile. It's still worthwhile. Let me give you some more examples. When I show what you can do with data-driven journalism, I use this example from Business Insider of all sources. They have a tradition of doing presentations for Wall Street, as we know. But this one is a good one, because this is how data is presented when it has a commercial purpose. It's a typical hockey stick, things go up, future looks bright. And just by adding one more layer of data, the story changes decidedly, because this is the global internet population, as you can read. This is a comparison. And I think providing comparison for data points, is one of the essential things that we do. And this is not hard to do. It's just a little bit of work and digging into it. But it's not essentially something that is not possible. It should be possible for basically any journalist. And we're buying the Kool-Aid from how people describe certain things too often, not showing these two sides. Let me go on. This is from a tweet from Sascha Venor. Zeit Online in Germany is by now pretty solid in using data for their reporting. They have trained more people in the newsroom to do charts than most that I know. And this is from a tweet that they didn't do it. It's a YouTube video from somebody, I guess, outside of journalism. And it's a comparison of how airlines make money in the ideal way if they sell every place, of course, and so on and so on. But what they're doing here is they are talking about the economics that surround us. Yeah, we're sitting in coach, and we don't know how this airline flies. I don't know how the cheap airlines actually keep their planes up and do security and so. I don't know. And we don't know for a lot of areas in life. And how can we expect the public to wake up to the more serious issues if we fail to make what surrounds us better understandable? And you could, arguably it's a discussion, but this is a visual representation, of what we eat. Yeah, it's pretty graphic. Yeah, but it's sticking. Yeah, it is relatively simple. It's a good creative idea, and that is part of journalism as well. Telling good narrative, telling good stories, not necessarily being drowned by the problems of data and statistics and visualizations and technology and all the stuff that we are not allowed to do in our newsroom. So, and there are really good examples coming from outside journalism. I would like to give a very specific shout out to Max Roser, who is an academic who started this website, Our World is Changing, and he kind of created his own little line charts tool, has developers, and what they do is really fabulous. They look at long-term development. A little bit like what made Hans Rosling so great, who sadly passed away recently. He was criticized in the statistic community to some extent for making it so accessible, for talking about data so that people could actually understand it. And this is really a great site. It shows us what we should be doing in the newsroom as well. So this whole development that's still part of the good part has resulted in quite a bit of newsroom being found. We have people from ProPublica here in the room, which is not listed here but should, because it's one of the major initiatives in this space, has contributed greatly. So there was, for a time, an idea in the larger news organizations, we have to have a data team. there are even, arguably some contributions for that better journalism is winning. We had recently very good numbers from the FT for paying subscribers, 655,000 as far as I remember. This is an interesting switch that the New York Times, although it lost a lot of revenue from advertising, at least recoups some of that by being able to sell news content for subscription. Subscriptions are a hard sell. It's not easy. And we have, we should ask ourselves, what happens if all our websites try to sell a subscription? I'm not sure whether people will, subscribe to 5 or 10 newspapers. Subscriptions are essentially, even if they are low, people do the math. Oh, I have to pay it every month. So it's a hard sell. So on the other side, we have these things which evolved out of my favorite chart from, I think it was 2015, when the New York Times had the first thing where you could go into the New York Times and draw on almost any device for the relationship between income of parents and the education of the kid. And what they do very well is they learn from the successful things that they created and you prolong them. This is an example. If you do that, what happened under Obama's rule, you find how little you actually really know in terms of numbers. You make guesses all the time. And this is really an innovative format. You have to draw it yourself. And then it's compared like how the others did. I think that's an excellent way of telling a story about what is actually the reality. So that is, you have to draw and then you get the comparison of what it really was. Usually it's surprisingly different. Timekeeping. So it's 1.5 hours.
Hello. Huh, we need to push it to make it silent. Push it. Okay, so this works. Whoever wants this. Whoever wants
Yeah,
this.
you pass it on, right?
Okay, shall we start?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining our session tonight on data journalism globally, where it is heading. So here today I am
lovely
with
button in the middle.
this two
No,
of them.
on that one, the push button. Yeah.
Hello. Yay. Okay. So I have 2 microphones. So today here we are with Mirko Lawrence, who is the innovation manager at Deutsche Welle and also CEO and founder of Data Wrapper. Mark Abra, head of the research and data at ICIJ. And Marianne Bouchard, manager of Data Journalism Awards for GEN. My name is Bahare Herabi, and I'm from the School of Information and Communication Studies at University College Dublin. So these are us. So today we are going to talk a little bit about data journalism briefly and what it is. If you're kind of new to data journalism and want to learn a little bit from Mirko on data journalism, then we will be presenting the